To be under control, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know what can happen. You need to know what to do when something different happens than you expected. So preparation is the key to being under control. And Boomeo is a tool for improving at CSGO, whether that be playing duels as a way to warm up different spots on the map very rapidly. You can get 10, 20 opportunities within a minute as opposed to playing an entire game. Whether that be watching videos from Counter-Strike veterans like Fallen, Shocks, Nothing. Now in esports, a large element of control, which seems to have kind of been to some degree hidden and hasn't really been picked up upon in terms of what an impact this has upon the industry, is who controls the numbers upon which esports growth and future investment are largely based upon, that largely derived from, largely impacted by. So as esports continues to grow and garner more mainstream attention, it gets in people from outside the industry who want to invest, who have never had any contact with esports before. Now, this has always been a topic of discussion and a potential problem, but in the past, this key issue of who is the first point of contact for these outsiders who have investment to try and understand the industry, to figure out whether they want to invest. So in the past, this initially usually meant tournament organizers, people like IEM, so ESL, people like the CPL back in the day, Angel Munoz, people like ESWC, Mathieu Dallion, or whatever his name was. Because if these people were the guys who had the clout to show with the big events and go to these big companies, pitch them like, you should sponsor my event, invest like $1 million and I can put on this whole circuit for you. More recently, the point of contact has often been team owners, because now we know team owners want to potentially take on investment from outside hedge fund groups or actually sports teams themselves, major American sports teams and around the world as well. Obviously FC Copenhagen getting involved with Dignitas's old lineup now known as North. So as esports now enters this phase of potentially unseen levels of investment, you could make a case we're already at that level, but even further, untold, almost exponential levels of investment, of growth, of gamble, essentially, that the scene can go much further than it can because people's money is riding on the idea that it will. As we enter this period in time, the question becomes, where do people who have masses of investment, money to invest, so people outside who just want to invest their money intelligently and then let it work and then gain off that, or people who want to invest because they want to buy in now and get their foot in the door to be part of a future sport or something huge like that? Question becomes, where are those people getting their information? They don't have knowledge of the industry. They haven't been around esports. So where are they getting their information to even initially tell them that this is maybe an area to look into? To then tell them this is an area that has the demographics they want. To then tell them you invest in this area, it can be worth X in 10 years. And as a result, this kind of an investment of Y is entirely justified. Who is going to be the person to tell them that? And who is going to control the numbers upon which those kind of guesses, those kind of estimations, those kind of models are formulated from? That's a big question to ask. And so an issue that I have with it is not just who is it, but the fact that if we don't know who it is and they aren't vetted in any way, there are massive opportunities for corruption here. There can be abuse of this system that could make people tens of millions of dollars before they ever get caught, before anyone ever even figures out anything was going on, and they may not ever face any real consequences as a result of it. So in League of Legends, we've seen already people have bought LCS slots for $1 million. We've seen in CSGO there's been this investment into teams that has made salaries at the top 10 team level double, triple, quadruple in the last year, year and a half. In Overwatch, we hear these tales that the league itself, Overwatch League that Blizzard's running, may have slots that are worth millions of dollars. And people are being sold not just on millions of dollars for the team, but then the idea that they're going to be tied to a location. And in the future, people maybe should build stadiums and there'll be localized events. So this is on a much bigger scale that's being promised than it was before. Now, one area that many people will have heard of who are in the industry, but actually a lot of fans might not be aware of, would be the now infamous, famous Newzoo reports. Because within the industry, a lot of people find that newer people, business people who come in from the outside, when they first heard about esports and they hear that it's this burgeoning industry and that it's growing every year and that it's tapping into young people, when they hear all these things, if you ask them, many of them will say that they've read the Newzoo report for last year or whatever it may be, and they've seen the growth and they've seen the graphs and they've seen the numbers, and that's what got them interested. That's what piqued their interest. Now, the problem with that is I don't know a single person who was involved with producing the Newzoo reports. I also don't know anyone who, when I've asked them, knows who was involved with producing the Newzoo reports. And yet, in theory, these would need to be people who have access to a lot of data, some of which is not public knowledge. Would need to be people who have access to experience within the industry and therefore know how to interpret the data. They would need to be people who know where to be skeptical, where to look and say, this number might not be legit, this one might be fudged over here. As far as I know, the people in this position may not, in fact, have any of these capabilities. No one really knows. And yet, they might be the first point of contact for a guy who comes in and might want to invest millions. Then you got to look, more recently, there was a Morgan Stanley report that said that the Overwatch League that Blizzard's going to run, which has yet to launch, has yet to have a single team publicly announced as being signed in, has only had rumors about how much slots will be worth, what will happen with slots, how many regional get slots. And despite all of this, they have published a report suggesting that this league could make more than $100 million annually. A massive amount of money for an esports league to make, unprecedented numbers. And purely from the league, this is, by the way, we're not talking about as in the game developer. Blizzard can make that from sales of Overwatch. So the way that League of Legends has made all their money, not from LCS, from using it as marketing for the game. No, the league's going to make this. So this is going to potentially, with where this is being published, see more outside industry people like, oh, well, are there still teams left? Right, I want to get involved. Oh, I want to potentially invest money. Oh, is esports getting that big? $100 million? Now maybe I'm going to get involved. But here's the problem with that. Who at Morgan Stanley has expertise, has qualification to verify that they know what they're talking about? Who says, where are they getting their data from? Where are their sources for these numbers? Then you've got to ask, are any of these numbers dodgy estimations? Because as you even looked into the reports about the Morgan Stanley report, you already found certain unchecked assumptions of how many viewers they'd get and how many they could get, and then what certain areas would be like. That seemed wildly... But one way to say it would be generous, but when we're talking about potentially getting people to invest millions, I'd say irresponsible. That would be one way to say it. I'd say unduly optimistic. I'd say almost like they were pumping up the whole situation to want to get people involved. It feels more like when you're trying to con someone into investing in a stock that you know is not quite as good as you say it is, but you want them to get in big on it because you get your commission at this point in time, or you're in some way, unbeknownst to them, involved with the stock and its success, and you're waiting for when to sell, when to buy, and you're figuring it all out, and there's a scam going on. That's what it feels like to some degree, because we don't know who the fuck these people are, and it's so rife for there to potentially to be corruption. So this is the question. Who is coming up with these numbers? Who qualifies to then be able to produce such numbers and to make such models? And then on what basis are they extrapolating them into the future and making a league that's never even launched, has no basis right now, into a league that makes $100 million annually? Something that would be unheard of for esports. Do tournament organizers help them get some of those numbers? Surely they would have to when you look at some of the numbers they're quoting, the overall figures. Yet here's the question. Who trusts tournament organizers to correctly produce their figures? Look through the history of esports. You'll see a lot of times and numbers that seem like bullshit, that seem like they can't have existed back then, or someone's purposely fucked around. There have even been stories in the past of some people, tournament organizers included, viewbotting their own tournaments to get higher numbers. There have been stories in the past of different streaming services around the world potentially quoting incorrect numbers or not reporting accurately. Then you've got to add in, if you're a tournament organizer, okay, beyond straight up lying, what happens when they fudge the number? What happens when the number's always this really round one, like 24 million, instead of like, well, was it really 24 million? Wasn't it 23,654,000? Now that might not sound like a big deal, right? Because on the one instance you quote that, that's not an issue. But what happens if someone takes your 24 million number and they add it into a bigger calculation? I mean, use your head. Let's say that each time we're quoting a number, it's 18,000. And so the organizer or the person making the report thinks, just make that 20,000, right? Well, we can already see you only need 10 instances of that happening with all the tournaments being run, and you have just added a fictional 20,000 viewers that you know was never there. Now, if you stop and think, you never even would claim were there, but have now been added into the mix. Now add that to people not just saying, oh, CSGO's getting this big, League of Legends they're showing pie charts and graphs that show all of esports in the entire world and the numbers they're getting. Oh, there's no fudging going on there, right? How does the person who's investing know how much wiggle room there is, how much error there is on these numbers, and the fact that these aren't actually sourced numbers? It's not like the NBA telling you their numbers. This is the big question to ask, right? And so you got to add in, when people are tournament organizers, they don't always just list the big streamers that you know, the big streaming services, the broadcast platforms. They sometimes list foreign sites. Well, famously, people have always criticized Chinese streams for this, because Chinese streams nearly always show more viewers than you would expect for a given event. Now, it's true, there are millions and millions of people in China who care about esports and watch, but how do we know that the Chinese people, at least when they're reporting to the West, are giving accurate numbers on their streams? How do we know that those numbers are actually what they represent, each an actual person? I mean, the tournament organizer in the West doesn't really have any way to verify that and check it with this streaming service in China. Also, how could he hold them accountable if they were lying to him? He couldn't really, right? And yet every link in the chain has all these unchecked assumptions, opportunities for corruption, and yet builds into something bigger where if everyone lies, everyone fudges, everyone fucks around a little bit with the truth, then at the end, potentially, what's the punishment? Oh, people might invest even more money in esports. And you know what? They might even justify, if I mess around a little bit with the numbers down here, when they invest more money, I'll use that well and I'll invest, and actually esports will get to the level that I told them it was going to be at. They'll even use that justification. You know, the means justify the ends. The ends justify the means, I guess, in that case, actually. It doesn't make sense. The ends justify the means. So this is a big problem. I worry about people corruptly reporting bullshit numbers or demographics or projected models simply to increase investment, to increase interest in the industry, interest in investment, to get exposure, because 10 million gets more eyeballs in the mainstream world than 6 million does, in theory, right? Imagine this as a sports example, right? Imagine you had a sports league where you wanted to have non-endemic sponsors from not from your industry, in other words, come in, invest millions in sponsoring the league, invest millions buying the broadcast rights, invest millions buying teams, buying ownership, etc. Imagine you wanted that, right? And you could make up the number of people watching the league. No, don't stop there. That would be brilliant in itself if you wanted to get people in. And no consequences for doing so. You could make up the demographics of who watches it. So you could even decide, right, there's a lot of money in this sector here. This is the sort of person they want. I'll say that their exact demographic breakdown is what I've got. What if you could do that? Well, that alone, right? Already, those two things right there. You'd have the game rigged and you could make billions potentially. Oh, no, but wait. You can also then make a model which projects that even though the numbers you have now are fudged, you're going to predict based on those millions and billions into the future, a year, 2 years down the line. And it's like the old confidence gag, right? You're like, oh, get in now. Of course, if you invest double, in 2 years, it's going to be worth 5 times. You know, you could do that as well. That alone, already we've seen the massive corrupt. No, wait, it's enough. You can do all of the above, and before the person who comes to invest ever meets an individual who has the qualifications, who will be honest with them, who doesn't in some way benefit from them investing their money, potentially losing it through the industry by some circuitous hidden means. If you could do all of that, do you think people would? What would stop them? These are real questions to ask, because in esports, this is happening.